Welcome everyone to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future. This week, once again finding myself without a guest. My husband was going to do a show on wolves, and we will be getting to that, but he had this thing called final exam tutorials that came up, and well, that kind of got in the way. And this left me kind of looking for a topic on rather short notice, and someone started to thread on a forum I'm on about Chernobyl, and the fact it had been, not quite 30 years since it had occurred. And this got me thinking a lot about nuclear accidents and things in general, and I thought, that could make a really interesting topic to do not one, but maybe several mini readings on. And that's kind of what I did here. So the first one I decided to look at was in fact Chernobyl because, well, there was 3 Mile Island in the US quite a while back. I think Chernobyl was the first one of the nuclear accidents that really caught the world's attention in a very profound way. So we're going to look on this show about readings about Chernobyl. I'm going to do Fukushima. And then, thanks to the request of some friends on the Webbot forum, after I posted the first 2 readings, someone suggested I look for the future of the United States. So we've got basically 3 mini readings here. I figure it'll take about most of the show to get through those. We'll go over them, and it'll just be a lot to think about and ponder. So the first one I did was, in fact, Chernobyl. And the way I asked the question, because I thought a lot about this before I did this, trying to figure out, well, what exactly do we want to find out? I mean, we know these events happened, but what kind of impact did they have and what might they have for the future? Because on this show, that's kind of also what we're looking at. So this is the way I worded my Chernobyl question, the first thing I'm looking at. And that was, what are the energies, the cards, and the runes would like to flag concerning the future or even the ultimate impact of the Chernobyl nuclear accident? You'll notice I didn't put a date on this because in this case, it's already occurred. We know when it happened, but we kind of want to know long term, what are the ultimate outcomes? And when I look at the runes and cards on this, the first things I can tell overall from this reading is that even nearly 3 decades on, the problems, issues, and aftermath of this particular nuclear accident are still with us, and unfortunately, they're likely to stay with us for a long time to come. Now, the first card, which sets the tone for this mini reading, is in fact a prison card. This is a picture of a prisoner trapped in a jail cell. He's unable to escape through the bars, and he's also chained up to the wall, and he's away from even the small amount of light that comes through the barred window that's sitting behind him. He's really in a fix. And as soon as I saw this card, I thought of that sort of cage of cement that the Soviets put around the melted down reactor. They were trying to imprison it. They wanted to keep the dangerous reactions inside and to stop the spread of radiation and other chemicals that were leaking out from this site. So in that sense, this card, well, it's usually a bad card. Like all cards, it has 2 sides. And in this case, the prison is actually quite positive. We don't want this stuff getting out. We want it to stay trapped. So the prison card is a good thing. The second card is the peace card, which is usually a good card. And it's a lovely cathedral bathed in light. It suggests that this worked for a time, that the prisoning was successful. Another aspect of the peace card is to keep things stable and unmoving, which is of course exactly what we want. So our first 2 cards are really a positive thing, and really I think it pretty much described the last nearly 30 years. We've had this object that's potentially very dangerous, but basically kept peaceful in its little cage. If we stopped there, I'd say things were grand. But we did want to keep looking, and unfortunately the third card is the card that's called Destruction. We're going to see a version of this card again in another deck at the end of these 3 readings, but right now it means exactly what it says in this reading. So what we have here essentially, if we put the 3 cards together, is the destruction of the prison, or the destruction of peace, or perhaps the destruction of stability. I feel that as the third card in this 3-side card reading I chose, this sort of thing is either ongoing or suggests a slightly potential future event. In other words, the destruction isn't quite here yet, though it may be going on behind the scenes. But the cement and other safeguards imprison the old plant site for now. but they may be in the process of being destroyed. You know, something that's been, and this has been verified by reports coming out over the last several years, that this plant has not been, or the cement around it has not been updated. The fall of the Soviet Union has placed this event in the Ukraine, which is, as we know now, a modern hotspot, but even before it was not exactly the most wealthy place. It's just sort of been forgotten about and abandoned. So there's this potential for a catastrophic failure at some point. But thankfully, that point hasn't been reached yet. The important news here, though, is the trap isn't holding. And I think the rest of the reading sort of tells us what might be released. Because we have, for our first kitty card, we have the sun. Now, the sun is many things. It's a big ball of fire up in the sky. On this card, he's portrayed as a happy, freedom-loving tomcat who has both a loving home and is free to roam where he likes. From a cat's point of view, this is about as good as it gets. But while this card is about freedom, vitality, assurance, and other really good keywords, it's also about the sun itself, that big ball up there in the sky, as I said, or in this case, perhaps the power of the sun, which can involve all things electrical, nuclear fission, nuclear power, nuclear reactions. You get it. One big ball of nuclear. So the aftermath of the accident, probably in terms of power, both nuclear and created in other ways, and the destruction card, all this together suggests that this event was part of the foundation of the events that have dampened the world's enthusiasm for old-fashioned style nuclear plants, at least to a degree. We know it didn't stop them altogether, but I can remember that after Chernobyl, people started to do a double think on this. You know, they started really wondering about this. However, I think there's also the potential for the destructive power of the sun, in other words, the nuclear reaction inside, to come back on this site to haunt us. Given the combination of cards, especially the destruction followed by the sun, in other words, the sun is the destroyer, that's a pretty darn good description of card-wise of a nuclear reaction, and not one that is especially helpful to human beings, at least in terms of the peaceful use of technology like we saw in the peace card. There's also someone on one of my forums pointed out, I believe it was on the Webbot, who said that, you know, there's also the potential of this site being threatened by fire itself. There have been some rather large drought or sun-caused fires in the area. So that's something else to pay attention to that we can't ignore. They are not mutually exclusive. They simply are options. Our second card in the kitty deck is the more direct Two of Swords. This is two Siamese cats. They're busy ignoring each other. If you know cats, they do this a lot. The key words for this card include stalemate, avoidance, and blocking. While this card appears, it can suggest that an issue is being avoided, is at a stalemate, or is not able to be solved at this time. But it also suggests the card has this strong sense of the problem simply can't be avoided forever, and that it's not just going to go away. If you're a cat, one of the two of you can solve it simply by getting up and walking away. Cats do this all the time. But there's this hint that that's not the likely solution here. I think overall, though, it's a pretty good description of the situation. And it suggests to me that while there is a potential for things to get worse, to fester, or even possibly destroy the containment vessels at this site, nothing's likely to be done about it anytime real soon. The situation is simply being avoided. And perhaps it will continue to be avoided until the disaster or destruction itself actually takes place. Our runes, unfortunately, also hint at this. With our sideways volcano rune, Kenaj, which is usually translated boil or torch, hinting at events slowly building up inside the plant and leading to either a real or figurative explosion. Like a volcano in nature or the eruption of a boil on a human body. Right now, I think the problems are still held in that figurative jail, but the problems inside simply haven't gone away, and they're just taking a very, very long time to come to the surface. There may be some good news, or at least a suggestion of an ultimate solution to the issue, in the last rune of Gabo, which means marriage or gifts. We can hope that in the long term, there's either a marriage of some new technology or perhaps even gifts from other parts of the world, maybe some money coming in, some technology, some helpful technicians that ultimately help settle things down and at least lower the danger. On the other hand, I can't ignore the other possibility of reading the gift or ultimate outcome of the situation is the explosion of everything currently trapped out in the open. In other words, it's gifted into being, which is not a gift perhaps that we want. It's a really unfortunate present, but there it is. Both options are possible given the cards, and I don't think that either is likely to be happening in the next few weeks or even months. That's the good news. But ultimately, the message of the Two of Swords is this isn't resolved, it isn't going to go away, and it's eventually going to have to be dealt with, one way or the other. So, I think we can reasonably take away from this mini-reading that even a more distant nuclear accident time-wise is still having an effect decades later, and will continue to do so. Perhaps until it ultimately escapes and does a lot more damage, but it may also force the world to deal with it. But for right now, it seems to be an issue that will continue just to be avoided for as long as possible. A potential time bomb ticking away, mostly unnoticed and unmentioned outside the region. This fits with some of the feedback I got on this reading because, like some of my readers on one of my forums, where I sometimes post these in advance for comments, I thought that this situation was pretty well put to rest. I think lots of other people did too. And to find out that it's actually kind of an ongoing problem, possibly beyond just the contamination it's already done, because I think a lot of us realize that, for a long time there may be some sort of mutations of animals and plants and sort of this dead zone that had been declared around it, even though there are still a few elderly people and whatnot living there. The reality may be that underneath it all, it's more like a sleeping volcano. It's put to rest for now, but it really hasn't been totally dealt with. So that was an interesting part to find out from this reading. Again, we won't know for sure for a long time, hopefully a very, very long time. I would love for someone to get their act together, and there's the hint of that in the cards and runes too, that again, if people got together and repaired the jail essentially and used some possibly new technologies, this could be kind of put to bed. But, just keep your eye on it because it hasn't totally gone away. Okay, so now we can move up from 30 years ago to the more recent nuclear accident, that of the meltdown in Fukushima. And this was the plant in Japan that was hit by the massive earthquake and then later the tsunami. What a lot of people don't realize is my understanding of events as I have read them is that the plant itself was built to withstand an earthquake, which in fact it did. It started to shut down, but when it was not built to withstand the sort of tsunami that hit it. So it was actually the damage done by the wall of water that came in and just completely overran the defenses that undid any kind of technology used to try to shut it down quickly and not cause harm. So we have this situation there where even though some safeguards were put in place, there was an act of Mother Nature that was strong enough that it overcame it. So unlike Chernobyl, where we effectively have the failure of human technology, here we have a combination of a failure of human technology when confronted with an Earth technology, a nature-based, not technology, but a nature-based event. So for clarity, I'm going to ask this question a similar way, but it's not quite the same. And again, normally I'd put time limits on this, but since part of what we want to know is a hint of the ultimate outcome, or at least potential outcomes, because the future probably isn't fixed yet, in the near or longer term. So I didn't put a time limit on it. The way I did ask it was, what are the energies the cards and runes would like to flag concerning the future or even the ultimate impact of the Fukushima nuclear power accident in Japan? Right away, this reading suggests that while there is still the potential for destruction in the Chernobyl accident, for the moment it appears to be trapped in simply a potential future problem, as we saw above. This reading, on the other hand, suggests the Japanese accident is currently ongoing and is an active problem. one that isn't just being ignored, but is intentionally being misrepresented and lied about. So how do I come to this sort of little summary here? Well, let me go ahead and break down the cards and runes so my audience can see where this is coming from. The first card is the Warrior. Now, in addition to sometimes being about war itself, which it can be, the Warrior card is also about being defensive, being protective, being strong, and also providing good leadership. Now, Japan as a culture has always prided itself in trying to protect its people, both from foreign invasions and even foreign ideas when they seem to be threatening. The Warrior on the card holds his sword down, but is watchfully guarding the camp and his city that lays behind it. That's a pretty good description of, from again, my outsider's understanding of a certain aspect of Japanese culture, which is to try to protect and to defend, which is usually a good thing. Now, if this card were by itself, we could relax a bit and hope that someone was indeed in control of the situation, and perhaps the powers that be knew what's best for everybody, or at least, again, had matters somewhat under control. Unfortunately, the next card is the Liar card. This card indicates that something is false, that things are not as they seem, and in this case, probably also indicates that some of the information being presented is downright lies. I hate to say that, but that is very likely. This card is also about distraction and literally not looking at the object behind the curtain, which is right there on the card. You have this Joker figure dancing in front of a curtain, holding up a mask, and he's like holding up a little puppet. He's distracting the audience from seeing the man or the object behind the curtain. So basically, the warriors, or perhaps those who should be the protectors, are likely misleading, lying, practicing distraction, or a combination of all three. And the third card gives us a very strong hint as to one of the major topics they may be lying or misdirecting us about, which is the libido. This card is first and foremost about human sexuality, but it's also about life forces, fertility, mating, and repeatedly also deadly distraction. This card shows two peacocks in an Eden-like garden with waterfalls, flowers, grass, flaming fall leaves. They're all engaging in a mating display, probably about to have a mock fight in order to impress a female peahen. We can't see her, but the implication is she's right off the card. Their cocks are so involved with each other, they don't seem to notice the lovely landscape, or even more importantly, the snake that lies in the grass right between them. The snake can strike and kill one or both of them at any time if he chooses to do so, and neither bird is likely to hear a warning rattle or any other sign of a snake until it's far too late. I mean, it just happens, boom, it's there, they're dead, because they're so involved in what they're doing, they're not looking. This very highly complex card not only reinforces the distraction qualities of the Liar card, but it suggests very highly that one of the aspects of this accident the defenders are not being honest about is the potential effects of this disaster on both life force and fertility. Life force itself would be the ability of living creatures, including human beings, to live healthy lives, and the fertility card could involve everything from the plants and the soil to babies not yet born, along with, say, livestock, pets, wildlife, and even the waters and the animals that live in the oceans, which are represented on the card by the lovely waterfall in the background. So, while we have more cards and runes yet to read, the sky cards so far already give us a kind of no-holds-barred punch of a reading that says flat out that the protectors are not what they seem, and that there is a huge threat to life and the creation of future life. Well, with that kind of wow introduction, what does the rest of the reading have to say? I'm afraid the drama doesn't end with a side card. Our kitty cards start with the Wheel of Fortune. Now these are on a card. This is a wonderful card. Happy barn cats climb on the wheel of a wagon. There's mice and birds about. And the cats look like they may be thinking of hunting one or the other, but they're still in the process of making up their mind. I love this card because I actually have a photo that I took of an old wagon in our own yard with cats doing very similar things. It's a very barn cat card. However, this card is actually about great changes. It's about fate and even karma when it shows up in a reading. It tends to come up when something very powerful, life-changing, or world-changing is afoot. It can also represent a new phase or a new cycle. Basically, think of the turning of the wheel. In this context, it suggests that things have already been set in motion from this accident, some of which cannot be changed, but are the result of decisions made in the past that are now rolling into the present. There will be future choices, such as deciding if the hunt today will be about birds or about mice, or even maybe we'll just decide to lay down and take a nap. But those future choices can only roll with the wheel. The important thing is they cannot stop the wheel from turning. It's already in motion. From this, I gather it's simply too late to prevent some of what this nuclear accident is doing in terms of damage and effects on the Earth, which is not to say nothing could be done. There will be future choices, but that the original decisions that built it, put it there, and ultimately allowed a wave to take it out can't be undone. They can only be acknowledged and perhaps modified in some ways. Our little Page of Cups kitten is next. He's a very shy but loving little kitten on the card. He's a baby who just wants to purr and love you once you win his trust. His card is all about trusting and also using personal intuition when dealing with a situation. In the negative aspect, I think this card is about the warrior protectors intentionally misleading people about why the wheel is turning. But on the positive side, I think it's also about trusting your personal feelings when it comes to dealing with the aftermath of this situation. Basically, if something doesn't feel right, don't ignore the impulse and, use the impulse to keep asking questions or to take proper actions as far as you were able. I also got kind of a sense when looking at this card of sort of, the whole, again, that the protectors possibly using that whole tendency that, again, one gets looking from the outside, that impression of Japan where cute things and kittens and, that sort of Hello Kitty and that sort of thing is very, very popular, which is not a bad thing. I mean, I spend a lot of time, watching YouTube videos of cats as well as petting my own, but when it goes from being something very, very wonderful and cute and life-affirming to something distracting, if it's distracting you from actually doing what you need to do, or in this case, perhaps knowing what you need to know, then it has morphed from being a good thing to not a real life-affirming thing. I really get that feeling here. Now, finally, we have the two runes which echo the rest of the reading, but also provide a bit more information on the challenges facing Japan and potentially the world from this accident. The first rune is Fehu, which literally means cattle or livestock. It's also associated with wealth, fertility, gold, and sexuality. So once again, we have an even stronger indication that just like the libido card, that the fertility of the soil and the reproductive health of human beings and animals is likely at stake here, as well as potentially affecting the wealth and the gold of the world. In other words, the world of commerce and the economies. And then finally, we have Iwaj, or the yew tree. This is one of the most complex runes in the whole set. The yew tree is traditionally considered a tree of death and was commonly planted in European graveyards, being long-lived and also an evergreen. But while the tree is safe for a short time, it also produces a poison that can make people very sick if they sit underneath it too long. It's often seen as the link between heaven and earth in the runes, the roots in the ground and the branches above, and some very eminent Norse scholars believe that the needle ash described in the evergreen world tree Yggdrasil in the Viking Age poem Völuspá was meant to be about the needle-leaved evergreen yew rather than the more common reading of ash tree. So there's a potential that this is also the world tree. We don't know for sure, but it's a very powerful image. It's a very cosmic tree, but one that hints at hidden poison that isn't obvious at first glance. And of course, nuclear power and even reactions themselves can both give life when used in medicine, or even the production of power, or death when things go terribly wrong. It's interesting that the chemotherapy drug Taxol was originally derived from yew trees, initially the Pacific yew, but later the European yew was used as well. It's used effectively for many solid tumors and cancer, but one of its most significant side effects can be ovarian damage and destruction of female fertility. So you've got this, again, this sort of cancer fertility link that's very, very powerful in the rune itself. My roundup on this mini reading is that not only is the situation in Japan an ongoing and potentially deadly situation, it's one that is poisoning the physical world around us and potentially disrupting the reproduction of both plants and animals, but also is being intentionally lied about and handled, again, with intentional distractions. I'm repeating that word intentionally, by the very people who are supposed to be protecting us. So that's 3 intentionals, and there's a reason for it, not just because I couldn't remember to type extra words. It's just very profound, and it's very upsetting. There's also a hint that the ultimate outcome of this will not be known for certain anytime really soon, but that war or conflict is potential that should not be ignored and could come out of this, both because I think of that warrior card and also because of that potential to disrupt the world economy or the world wealth. We're not getting any runes or cards for homeland, inheritance, etc. So what I'm not seeing here is something like an immediate evacuation of Japan or, massive relocations of people, that kind of thing. However, given some of the information of the cards, it might have been better in the long run if questions like that had been directly faced, at least talked about, instead of sort of swept under the rug and again replaced by pictures of all those cute kittens and other distractions. But again, pretty much we have an ongoing crisis. This is currently in process, only instead of being trapped and jailed like the destruction delayed for the longer future we saw in the first reading, and therefore having the potential, if the warning is heeded, to be dealt with and headed off at the pass, the situation in Japan is being intentionally ignored and evaded, but it totally isn't going away. In fact, even some of what seems to be protective measures may in fact conceal further poisons and threats, especially if not used or respected properly. Now, that's not a really hopeful or great reading. My only suggestion is, again, that we all keep our eyes on it. There's not a whole lot we can do about it. If you live there and you're one of my listeners, I mean, you could possibly look at moving or relocating, but even then, I'm not sure that this certainly cannot be totally escaped, and at some point there are going to have to be some decisions made. But basically, unlike the first one, this is an ongoing threat. Okay, well, that's our first 2 historical disasters. In the second half of the show, we're going to take a look at the U.S., so we'll be right back right after these short messages. You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages.
Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com, for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today?
We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future. And now we move on to the U.S. And rather than simply reading about 3 Mile Island like I mentioned at first, terrible as it may have been, I thought it would be a better use of time to look at the potentials for a nuclear accident in the United States within the next 5 years or so. I did this because, again, 3 Mile Island happened quite a while ago. I'm sure there are some ongoing effects, but for the most part, I think it's not nearly as serious, so I could be wrong. We can look at it again later. But I thought the more urgent thing was to see what we might be facing potentially in our near future here, especially given what we now know from Chernobyl and from Fukushima. Now, I am going to put a time limit on this reading, because the future, well, it goes on for a long time. It's the future. And I've noticed topics like this one, the further one looks out, the less likely they tend to be really readable and usable. Now, part of this is just because, well, we don't, I mean, knowing about a potential accident, say the year, 2100 would be interesting, but doesn't particularly impact our lives in our generation. There may be a few of us that might live to see that, but, for the most part, most of my listeners probably won't. So, it's not that we don't care, it's just that it's not an immediate issue. Also, some very large events stay fairly consistent in the future in terms of readings, but smaller ones, or those affected more by the choices of human beings, tend to vary quite a bit. I think this is one reason why you'll sometimes get different readings on the same situation at different times. Because, again, I don't believe the future is fixed. I believe we're dealing with potentials. Some things are more fixed than others, but particularly those being dealt with by human beings tend to be less so. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go with a 5-year time limit that takes us to about the year 2020. I'm not giving a firm date on it, but just kind of from now till 2020. I debated trying to define words like serious nuclear accident, because remember, the more we define something, it tends to be the clearer an answer we get. But I decided to leave it open. If one occurs, if we have an accident, unfortunately in the near future, we can go back and look at it. But obviously, I don't want to worry about really, really tiny events that might happen in a local lab someplace. That would qualify as an accident, but it wouldn't really, I don't think it's really what we're looking for. We're interested in serious nuclear accidents, either involving a power plant or something similar. And while an accident could involve nuclear weapons, like something could go wrong with them, please note that I'm not asking about potential use of nuclear weapons in a hostile manner. That's going to be a different reading, and I may do that at some point. But what we're asking about here is potential for serious nuclear accidents, either with civilian or military equipment. Any of those would qualify. So power plant, lab explosion, site, something happening with a nuclear storage site, nuclear weapons blowing up on the launch pad, anything like that would qualify. But we've narrowed it down to accident, not warfare. So this time I asked the question, what are the most likely energies and or events concerning a possible serious nuclear accident in the United States, its territories, or I added the rest of North America between now, May 2015, and during the next 5 years, or approximately until the year 2020. Well, again, at first glance, my cards and rune combination suggests that while a serious nuclear accident is unlikely to occur in the next 5 years, the potential for one as a possibility does exist, especially towards the end of the time period or slightly afterwards that I'm allowing for this reading. Like a lot of readings where human choices are involved, as I said above, the timing thing is complex and uncertain. But I want to go ahead and break this down so everyone at home knows where this is coming from and can be watchful and come to their own conclusions. Because as I said, the potential is there. It's a kind of mixed bag. The first card, the one that sets the tone for this reading, is the home. And it pinpoints for certain that the cards have understood the question and even our location. While technically a home or a homeland is where a person happens to live, wherever that is. Since 9/11, homeland has become another word often applied to the U.S., especially internally in the U.S., in terms of national security, in both positive and negative ways. The people that do the generational analysis even refer to the youngest children being born during this period as the homeland generation. This is kind of what hit me when I first saw this card. It is this sense of homeland that I'm picking up from the card, Also, the US is my original homeland, so there's that attachment too. Even when doing current event readings, a reader has to pay attention to their own perspectives. So all around, I think this is the cards flagging the North America and specifically the US. The birth card comes next, and it suggests something new, something different, or a new trend coming down the road, possibly a new technology. I suspect this may at least partly be a really good thing, because rather than read this card alone, I'm going to include the Sage or Wisdom card that comes after it. I feel they're a pair, and they should not be separated. So together we have this combination of the home or homeland, birth, and the Sage or Wisdom that hints at a growing understanding of what causes these nuclear accidents, how to prevent them, or perhaps even lessen their impact. Even if this is only about some new safety regulations and a realization of the danger, it's a good sign. Until the accident in Japan, I honestly don't think the powers that be, maybe outside of the industry in the US, really had a clue of just how dangerous some of the older plants and storage facilities could be. Having essentially dodged a larger bullet with 3 Mile Island, the matter simply didn't seem to be much on the radar of most people. Now I suspect it's coming much more sharply into focus. It's not that everybody sits around and thinks about it all day, but it isn't an automatic blank either. On the other hand, these 3 cards also suggest a need for study, a need for wisdom, and a need for innovation and knowledge if things are going to go forward in a positive manner. If that doesn't occur, the potential seen in the next cards and runes become more probably and increasingly worrying. They become a much higher potential. So what are these things that I'm seeing in the next cards? So when we look at our kitty cards, we are confronted again by our Siamese kitties, featured in the swords, this time as the 5 of Swords. This is one very angry and scared lady cat. She sits on a scale at the vet's, and she's in a crouched position, she's baring her teeth, she's got a loud hiss, and probably making the vet wonder why she didn't choose a comfortable job as an accountant or something. This kitty is not really in any danger, but she thinks she is. And boy, is she ready for battle. She's ready to defend herself against the evil human about to weigh her, or perhaps is going to give her a shot. She will kitty them first, or at least bite them and add a few claw marks to remember her by if she just gets a chance. The key words for this card are self-interest, discord, and dishonor. And the card is also about letting little things blow up into big things, or about overreacting with extreme anger and emotion during a time when cool-headed thinking could calm a situation down. Sometimes that situation may not really be as bad as it seems. Other times it may really be threatening, but it's that overreaction that we're concerned about. It's not helpful, and it's not actually going to solve the problem. This card suggests to me that at some point during the next 5 years, that either something small but very dangerous may be ignored, or it's possible that a problem or accident could occur because of an overreaction or emotional thinking on the part of someone who's supposed to be in charge. This could even be like a defensive overreaction where somebody refuses to look at or examine something that really is leading up to a problem, but might otherwise, bring dishonor or perhaps end the career of those involved. I saw this a lot when I worked for bureaucracies and even when I was in college, and if it's just a university professor that doesn't want their theory disrupted, well, that can be painful enough for, say, a grad student, but it probably isn't life-threatening. But in this case, if we have somebody who just gets really defensive and, well, that's perfect, it's going to be fine, it's all right, and doesn't look at it, that could be serious. And what I'm getting here actually is the image of what happened when a skilled or experienced veterinarian, say, is trying to handle the cat. She's going to be fine. I mean, she's maybe wondering why she didn't become an accountant, but ultimately, my veterinary clinic has actually steel gloves that they can use for cats like this, and they do. They don't hurt the kitty, but they protect the vet, and the experienced vet will know to get her gloves and then come back and deal with the cat and hopefully calm her down and possibly even give her a shot to help her relax if she's really that upset. But instead of this experienced vet, let's say we have a busy secretary who walks in, sees this cat, sees the cat about to attack and decides that she really can't deal with the situation. And she just closes the examining room door and ignores the cat, hoping it will be okay until someone more skilled returns. And let's just say that instead of the vet coming back or the vet tech coming in, the secretary goes back to her phones, gets really busy, and forgets about the cat. That's the impression that I'm getting. So we have this very angry cat seething in the office on top of the scales. I will not be surprised if an accident does occur during this period, or occurs later, it's like after the 5 years, because it's a result of an action, or more likely the inaction, just like I just described. And then in the future, historians might write about that poor junior person who perhaps tried to open the door or explain the issue, who was shouted down, or maybe just simply gave up and closed the door because they really didn't know how to fix anything anyway, and hoped that somebody higher up would understand. I get this kind of feeling of both, and from the looks of this card, if I'm reading this correctly, that poor person, or perhaps even group of people, are somewhat doomed either way, because like Cassandra, they either won't be believed, or if they do tell what they know, or their careers are going to be over if they try to say anything and essentially blow the whistle. So the result is the same either way, that things fester, and the cat stays in the room. And the following card is unfortunately our old friend, the Tower of Destruction. And this deck is simply called the Tower. It shows a young calico cat tumbling off the roof of her home during a storm. For the moment, there is absolutely nothing the cat can do to change her situation or her future. The only thing she can do is move kind of into that cat landing position and hope to survive the fall. Even if she does survive the fall, her situation in life will be altered, and she'll have to go forward in new circumstances. Key words for this card are sudden change, release, downfall, and revelation. None of which is really comforting given our previous cards and the overall question. It suggests that if an accident does occur, again, either within the next 5 years or just outside, while in reality it will be a long time building, it will happen suddenly, resulting in this release, either maybe radiation or perhaps a nuclear meltdown explosion, and it will probably lead to the downfall of those responsible, and perhaps that of whatever sort of nuclear plant, device, item, or other technologies affected. It could be the downfall of other things too. I think you can use your imagination here. But I suspect there's going to be a lot of ongoing revelations for years to come afterwards about what happened, how it happened, and what it means for the future in terms of coping with the aftermath. And again, moving forward with or without the particular technology affected, because again, we don't know exactly where or which type of nuclear technology has this issue. Finally, our runes give us a couple of other hints as to what some of the causes or problems could be that bring about such an accident, or could be used to prevent one if accepted and dealt with first. Again, if that happens, then we don't have the second part. Our runes together are Ansuj, usually translated mouth, and Thurisaj, which is thorn or a prick. Now, Ansuj is all about communication and lack of communication, and Thurisaj is often about something that pricks or suddenly pries open an existing situation. It looks like a thorn, and think of what happens when you put your hand on a stem of roses and you put it down too far and your hand gets, suddenly you have blood and it hurts. That's the pricking of the thorn, and that's what we've got here. Ansuj also has strong associations with the god Odin, who's known for his love of battles, craftiness, wisdom, and even secrets. He's a lot like the Sage card we had earlier, but a bit more slippery. This rune suggests that good communications, again, could catch the problem early and either prevent or at least modify the outcome of the potential accident in question, the one that might occur. However, the Thurisaj rune suggests it's more likely that Ansuj will manifest as miscommunication or missed communication, as we've seen in the previous cards. And if the opportunity is lost, then things will slowly rise like a bubble until the bubble is suddenly pricked and the balloon explodes. Putting this all together, we get a potential future where the chances of a nuclear accident are again mixed. There is certainly the potential for one or more. We don't have a number, we were just looking for one. But it doesn't feel totally fated to occur either. It's a little fuzzy in that way. Rather, it feels more like a Challenger accident type of situation where a tiny thing became very wrong. Many people did try to warn about the potential problem, but there was an intentional decision made to ignore them. In some cases, the voices were never heard by those who needed to hear them. And in other cases, the information was ignored by those who did not hear, but felt they were either too much or too great of a threat, or an intentional choice was made not to believe the danger until the roof went right out from under them. Now, one thing I'm not seeing from these cards and runes is a natural disaster of some sort that causes the accident. That is, unless the destruction is actually caused by a physical or political storm, or something bursting like a large dam. That sort of event is possible in both the destruction card and the Thurisaz rune, but feelings of miscommunication, emotional reaction, and refusals to face reality feel stronger in this case. On the other hand, I know there have been quite a few warnings given about the number of aging power plants and even storage sites that are at risk from earthquakes, storm damage, or flooding from like a broken dam, or even forest fires. So that could be the prick that bursts the nuclear bubble here. There is a potential. It just doesn't feel as strong. It feels like more, if it happens, it's more an afterthought almost. It may be the initial cause, but it was actually because nothing was done before. However, the good news, such as it is that the accident, or at least the first one, since we're reading about it, does not have to occur. If wisdom is used, rather than reactive emotions, and the situation looked at with a cool head and dealt with early on, this particular accident could recede back into the being a potential future that simply did not occur. Do I think this is likely? Well, honestly, looking at the cards, no, but it's still possible. The repeating accident cards and runes themselves, the Five of Swords, destruction, bad communication, and thorn, all happen towards the end of the reading. If the home chooses to use the birth of knowledge to fill in the holes in the system and repair them first, then the second outcome need not occur. It's definitely a two-stage process. Will time-wise the cards look like a sequence, which is why I placed the likelihood of an accident, should it occur, further down the road towards the end or just after the time period. It is possible that if it happens, it could strike sooner. The cards and runes just are both very bad on timing in my experience, and they work with potentials and energies rather than the position of time itself. However, what does have to occur, I believe, is first you would have to have this deliberate, intentional, almost, or emotional reaction first that ignores the problem, followed by the issue, by the actual explosion or accident of whatever occurs. So there, even if it happens fairly quickly, there's still this two-stage process. In any case, I think this reading suggests that real communication and honesty about potential problems are indeed the key here. As we saw with Japan, not doing so either before, after, or during an event just makes them worse. Let's hope the North Americans learn from this before it's too late and actually take things under advisement instead of just repeating the process. Well, that was a rather wild and roundup for this show. I wasn't really expecting it to be quite that intense. I won't say I exactly enjoyed these mini readings, but they were interesting, that's for sure. I'd like again to thank the gang at the WebBot Forum for suggesting both the last read about North America and some of the other input they had. I thought it was really interesting, and I really liked the feedback I got, so thank you guys. Again, if you would like to suggest a show topic, potential guest, or even put forward a personal problem for reading here on the show, please write me at melodyreader@gmail.com. That's Melody with an I, reader like one word, @gmail.com. I can't promise to answer everything on the air, but I will look and consider all suggestions and take them under advisement. Meanwhile, I think that's enough for this week. Remember, stay positive anyway, and if you're concerned about nuclear issues and the likelihood that they may impact you in some way, there's a lot of great informational sites on the net that can help you take steps to protect you and your family. Remember, ultimately, you're the one that's in charge, and it's how things affect you, not just the greater world, that's important here. I think that's enough for this week, though, and I want to thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you next week here at Cat's Eye on the Future. You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.